The Galactic Empire always boasted of its supremacy, its vast reach spanning solar systems and planets. Among its leaders, there was a common belief that Earth's inhabitants were weak, naive, and unprepared for the brutal nature of galactic warfare. Earth had been watched from afar, noted for its inability to journey beyond its system and its focus on internal struggles. To the galactic elite, these traits marked a race unworthy of serious concern. They perceived Earth's warriors as outdated, relying on primitive technology and obsolete tactics, with no real grasp of modern combat. The Council of Warlords leading the Empire often mocked the notion of Earth's defenders, convinced that Earth's peace-loving diplomats lacked the backbone to face the galaxy's tough realities. For centuries, Earth had been under observation, analysts gathering data on its culture, technology, and military strength. All reports concluded the same Earth was vulnerable. It lacked the necessary weapons, fleets, or combat experience to resist an invasion. It would fall swiftly, like so many others before it. The Empire viewed Earth's military no differently from the smaller races they had previously conquered. A few armored vehicles, rudimentary aircraft, and basic infantry tactics comprised Earth's defenses. In their view, Earth was just another small planet ripe for conquest, with its people easily bent to the Empire's will. Despite whatever the reports may have hinted, the Council disregarded any suggestions that humans could be anything more than an obstacle. Their confidence was fed by the numerous worlds they had already subjugated, many of which had warriors who claimed to be fierce tribes living by the sword species evolved for combat since birth, yet all had crumbled under the might of the Empire's legions. The galactic rulers believed humans would be no different. They would send their invasion force, swiftly overwhelm Earth's defenses, and move on to the next conquest. It was routine, just a checklist of domination. Earth wasn't even viewed as a real challenge. When discussions arose about Earth's warriors during meetings, the warlords scoffed. To them, Earth's soldiers were relics of an old era, reliant on outdated tactics and ground warfare, unable to grasp space combat. What could these primitive beings possibly do against the Empire's fleets, their plasma cannons, and their impenetrable armor? The decision to invade Earth was made almost dismissively, for the Empire was far too powerful, and Earth would fall in days, maybe even hours. What they couldn't understand, what they never considered, was Earth's history. Humans had been fighting wars long before they ever reached for the stars. Their planet had been a battleground for millennia, shaped by conflict, revolution, and resistance. Their military had been hardened through centuries of warfare, with lessons passed down from one generation to the next. They evolved in a world where survival was never guaranteed, and that made them uniquely prepared for the unexpected. But the Galactic Empire didn't care about such details. They dispatched their ships, a massive armada, toward Earth, confident they would face minimal opposition. Earth, they believed, would surrender after a brief show of force, just as so many others had. They had seen Earth's technology, its nuclear weapons, aircraft carriers, and tanks, and deemed them inferior. What were these crude machines compared to the Empire's warships and energy shields? From their perspective, Earth's warriors were laughably primitive, still relying on projectile-based weapons, fuel-powered vehicles, and ground-based combat strategies. They never considered that Earth's soldiers might have an advantage. They never imagined that the tactics they dismissed could lead to their downfall. Instead, they focused on their superior numbers and advanced technology, convinced these alone would secure their victory. The first wave of the invasion was launched with absolute confidence. Galactic troops landed on Earth's surface, expecting immediate capitulation. In the early hours, their expectations were met. Earth's automated defenses were easily dismantled, and many cities were quickly subdued. The Empire's forces felt validated in their assumptions. This was precisely what they had predicted. Earth soldiers seemed disorganized, uncoordinated, and easy to defeat. But as they advanced deeper into Earth's territory, a strange shift began. It started with small pockets of resistance, groups of soldiers who refused to retreat, fighting back with aggression and precision the invaders hadn't anticipated. These weren't the confused, panicked civilians they had encountered in the initial stages of the invasion. These were trained warriors, well-coordinated and relentless. The Galactic commanders dismissed these early skirmishes as anomalies, perhaps a few well-trained Earth units. But as the Empire pushed further into strategic locations, they encountered more of these soldiers. Then they met the U.S. Marines. These soldiers were unlike the others Earth had to offer. The Marines fought with an intensity, coordination, and expertise that left the invaders stunned. They moved with precision, adapted quickly to alien technology, and executed tactics far beyond what the invaders had expected from such a primitive force. The Marines didn't just hold their ground, they pushed the invaders back. The Empire's forces, used to overwhelming their enemies with superior firepower, found their tactics ineffective against the Marines. The Marines fought in small, coordinated units, employing guerrilla tactics, ambushes, and hit-and-run maneuvers to outsmart the Empire's larger, bulkier troops. The invaders, who had expected an easy victory, found themselves facing a different kind of enemy. These humans, these Marines, were something else entirely. For the first time in centuries, the Galactic commanders felt something unfamiliar: uncertainty. The reports had been wrong. Earth's warriors weren't weak or naive, they were far more dangerous than the Empire had ever imagined. The Galactic forces, once so confident in their ability to subdue Earth quickly, began to realize they had vastly underestimated their opponent. What had initially been thought of as a routine invasion was rapidly transforming into something far more complicated. The first encounters with the U.S. Marines had shaken them, leaving the invaders stunned. These humans, armed with seemingly inferior technology and limited resources, were fighting back with the tenacity and skill that the Galactic forces hadn't encountered in centuries. It wasn't just about brute strength or overwhelming numbers, it was the way the Marines fought. From the moment they engaged with the Galactic troops, the Marines demonstrated an almost uncanny ability to adapt. They studied their enemy, learned their weaknesses, and exploited every gap in their defenses. While the invaders relied heavily on their advanced technology, the Marines used the environment to their advantage. Hills became defensive positions, forests turned into ambush sites, and urban areas were transformed into confusing mazes where the invaders found themselves disoriented and vulnerable. The Galactic soldiers, who were trained for large-scale warfare on open battlefields or in the vacuum of space, were utterly unprepared for this kind of combat. They were used to overwhelming their enemies with sheer firepower and superior tech, but the Marines didn't fight on their terms. Instead of engaging in head-on battles, the Marines employed guerrilla tactics, striking in small strategic bursts before vanishing back into the shadows. This strategy confused and demoralized the Galactic troops, who had no response for such unconventional warfare. Every time they thought they had the upper hand, the Marines would hit from another direction, using hit-and-run tactics that kept the invaders on edge. The Galactic forces, who had arrived on Earth expecting a quick, decisive victory, were now bogged down in a conflict they couldn't control. Their advanced technology, which had been the cornerstone of their dominance, was proving to be of little advantage in this type of warfare. In fact, it was becoming a liability, as the complex systems they depended on were vulnerable to sabotage. The Marines had already learned how to jam their communications, disrupt supply lines, and disable key equipment with pinpoint accuracy. As the battles raged on, the Galactic commanders grew increasingly desperate. They had never encountered an enemy like this before, a force that fought with such intensity, coordination, and adaptability. Their previous conquests had all followed the same pattern: land, overwhelm, dominate. But this wasn't happening on Earth. The human soldiers, particularly the U.S. Marines, were proving to be far more resilient than they had anticipated. They weren't just fighting to defend their planet, they were fighting for survival, and that gave them an edge the invaders couldn't match. What the Galactic forces didn't understand was that the Marines weren't just fighting to win a battle, they were fighting to protect everything they held dear. Their families, their homes, and their very way of life were on the line, and that gave them a determination and strength the invaders couldn't comprehend. To the Marines, this wasn't just another conflict, it was a war for their very existence, and they weren't fighting alone. As word of the invasion spread, other Earth forces began to mobilize, joining the Marines in the defense of their planet. Civilians took up arms, former military personnel returned to the battlefield, and entire communities rallied together to resist the invaders. The Galactic commanders, who had expected Earth to crumble under their assault, were now witnessing the rise of a global resistance. Despite the overwhelming odds, the humans fought back with everything they had. They refused to let the invaders take their home, and that refusal became the driving force behind their relentless counterattacks. What had once seemed like a guaranteed victory for the Galactic forces was quickly turning into a nightmare. The invaders, for all their technological superiority, couldn't match the sheer willpower and determination of the Marines and the people of Earth. As the conflict continued, the Galactic forces began to lose ground. Each engagement with the Marines cost them dearly, in both lives and morale. For every inch of territory they gained, they lost soldiers, equipment, and their sense of invincibility. The invaders, who had once believed Earth's defenders were weak and primitive, were now facing a reality they hadn't prepared for. The humans weren't just resisting, they were fighting back with a level of skill and intensity that the galactic forces had never seen before. The Marines, already highly trained in combat, were now incorporating the enemy's technology into their own strategies. They reverse-engineered captured weapons, learning how to turn the invaders' own tools against them. Energy shields, plasma rifles, and advanced targeting systems, these were now being used by the very people the invaders had sought to conquer. The galactic forces found themselves fighting a losing battle, not just against the Marines' superior tactics, but against their own technology. Frustration and fear began to spread among the invaders. What had once been a confident, organized force was now unraveling. The commanders, who had been so sure of victory, were now scrambling to understand how things had gone so wrong. They couldn't comprehend how a race they had dismissed as primitive and weak was now turning the tide of the battle. Every assumption they had made about Earth's warriors had been wrong. But it wasn't just about the military prowess of the Marines. The galactic forces were beginning to realize that these humans had something far more powerful than advanced technology or superior tactics. They had a spirit that couldn't be broken. No matter how many losses they suffered, no matter how overwhelming the odds, the humans kept fighting. They didn't give up, they didn't falter, and they didn't fear the enemy. To the invaders, this was a new kind of warfare, one they were completely unprepared for. As the days wore on, the once mighty galactic forces found themselves on the defensive, retreating from areas they had previously captured. The humans, led by the relentless U.S. Marines, were pushing them back, reclaiming territory with every battle. What had once been a confident invasion had now turned into a desperate struggle for survival. And for the first time in centuries, the galactic commanders were forced to admit the unthinkable: they might not win this war. The humans, those soft, naive Earthlings, had proven to be the most dangerous adversaries the Empire had ever faced. The galactic invaders, now fully aware of the dire situation they were in, tried to regroup and reorganize their forces. What had once seemed like an inevitable victory was slipping from their grasp, and they were beginning to understand that they had vastly underestimated their enemy. The human forces, particularly the U.S. Marines, had completely shifted the dynamics of the battle. What had started as a defensive effort had now turned into a full-blown counteroffensive, and the galactic commanders were struggling to keep pace. The Marines, emboldened by their early successes, began to take more aggressive actions. They didn't just defend their positions anymore, they pushed the invaders back, launching calculated, precise attacks that dismantled the invaders' hold on key territories. The galactic forces, who had once prided themselves on their superior tactics, now found that their conventional strategies no longer worked. The Marines had adapted to their every move, learning the weaknesses in the galactic forces' technology and exploiting them ruthlessly. The key to the Marines' success was their ability to think on their feet. While the galactic forces relied on rigid protocols and predetermined strategies, the Marines understood the importance of flexibility. They adapted to the ever-changing conditions of the battlefield, constantly evolving their tactics to meet the challenges posed by the alien invaders. One of the most significant shifts in the conflict came when the Marines began to use the invaders' own technology against them. Through captured equipment and reverse engineering, they figured out how to disable key systems in the galactic forces' arsenal. The once impenetrable energy shields, which had provided the invaders with a major advantage, were now being bypassed. The Marines had discovered how to disrupt the shields, rendering them ineffective in battle. This breakthrough not only leveled the playing field, but it also gave the humans a decisive advantage in many engagements. For the galactic forces, this was an unimaginable setback. The shields were supposed to be infallible, a near-absolute defense that guaranteed their victory. But now, the humans had cracked the code, turning the invaders' greatest strength into a crippling liability. The Marines wasted no time in exploiting this vulnerability. They launched coordinated assaults that struck at the heart of the invaders' formations, leaving them exposed and vulnerable. It was a turning point in the war, but it wasn't just technology that gave the Marines the upper hand. Their resolve, their sheer will to fight, was unmatched. While the galactic forces fought for conquest, the Marines fought for survival. This fundamental difference in motivation was something the invaders couldn't understand. To them, the idea of fighting with such intensity, such unyielding determination, was foreign. They had never encountered an enemy with this level of passion, and it was starting to take a toll on their morale. The invaders, once so confident in their superiority, were now beginning to doubt themselves. Every time they thought they had the humans cornered, the Marines would strike back harder and more determined than before. It was as if the humans thrived on adversity, growing stronger the more they were pushed. This kind of resilience was something the Galactic forces were utterly unprepared for. They had never faced an enemy that refused to break, no matter the odds. As the conflict dragged on, the Galactic commanders grew increasingly desperate. They threw everything they had at the humans, deploying their most advanced weapons, their elite soldiers, and even their high-ranking warlords in a final attempt to crush the resistance. But every attempt was met with fierce resistance. The Marines, alongside other Earth forces, had become a coordinated, unstoppable force. They had learned to counter the invaders' every move, turning what had once been a losing battle into a war of attrition that the invaders were ill-equipped to handle. The toll on the Galactic forces was immense. Their supply lines were stretched thin, their troops were demoralized, and their commanders were at a loss for what to do next. Every attempt to regain control was met with failure, and it was becoming clear that their invasion had not only failed, but was now putting their entire fleet at risk. The very thing they had feared, an extended conflict, had become a reality, and the Galactic forces were crumbling under the pressure. The Marines, on the other hand, showed no signs of slowing down. They had learned from their early encounters, adapted to the alien technology, and now fought with a level of precision and efficiency that the invaders couldn't match. The battle had shifted, and the invaders who once thought themselves unbeatable were now on the run. Earth's forces had gone from defending their planet to actively reclaiming lost territory, driving the invaders out of key positions and forcing them into a full-scale retreat. For the Galactic commanders, this was an unthinkable outcome. They had come to Earth expecting an easy victory, but now they were facing total defeat. The humans, these supposedly weak and naive Earthlings, had proven to be the most formidable adversaries the Empire had ever faced. Every assumption they had made about Earth and its people had been wrong. These weren't primitive beings easily bent to the will of the Empire. These were warriors, forged in the fires of countless battles, determined to defend their home at all costs. The retreat was inevitable. The Galactic forces, once so sure of their dominance, were now fleeing for their lives. Their ships, which had once symbolized their unstoppable might, became their only means of escape. They left Earth's atmosphere in disgrace, abandoning their failed invasion and retreating into the vastness of space. What had begun as a confident attempt to subdue a supposedly weak planet had ended in utter humiliation. For the Marines and for Earth as a whole, this was more than just a victory. It was a defining moment in human history. The invaders had come to Earth believing it to be an easy target, but they had learned the hard way that humanity was not to be underestimated. The Marines had proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that Earth's warriors were among the most capable in the galaxy. Their victory was not just in reclaiming their planet, it was in shattering the very notion that humans were weak. As the last of the invader ships disappeared into space, the Marines stood victorious. The invasion was over, but the implications of what had transpired would ripple across the galaxy. Other species, other empires would take note. Earth was no longer an isolated, insignificant planet on the fringes of the galaxy. It was now a symbol of strength, resilience, and defiance. The Galactic leaders, who had once scoffed at the idea of Earth's warriors being anything more than a nuisance, were now forced to reconsider their entire view of humanity. They had learned a valuable lesson. Earth was not just another planet to conquer, and its people were not to be underestimated. The spirit of humanity, embodied in the relentless determination of the U.S. Marines, was something no amount of advanced technology or superior numbers could overcome. The Galactic Empire had met its match, and the galaxy would never forget the day they encountered Earth's unbreakable resolve. In the wake of the Galactic forces' retreat, Earth stood victorious, but the scars of war were etched across its landscape. Cities that had been occupied lay in ruins, and the devastation caused by the invasion was widespread. Despite the destruction, a profound sense of resilience and unity emerged from the chaos. Humanity had faced an overwhelming adversary and emerged stronger than ever before. The U.S. Marines, who had been at the forefront of Earth's defense, had become a symbol of that strength of force that had turned the tide of war and delivered a clear message to the galaxy. Earth was not to be conquered. As the Galactic leaders convened in secret, reeling from the disaster that had befallen them, they faced a sobering reality. Their invasion of Earth had been more than just a military failure, it was a political catastrophe. Empires that had never known defeat were now forced to confront their own arrogance, their own blind spots. They had underestimated humanity, seen Earth as a primitive, insignificant backwater, and that misconception had cost them dearly. Now, in the aftermath, they had to reckon with the undeniable fact that humans were far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. In their hushed discussions, some voices within the Empire suggested another invasion, one better planned and equipped to succeed where the first had failed. But the memory of the U.S. Marines haunted these conversations. The invaders had witnessed firsthand the sheer tenacity and ingenuity of Earth's defenders, and the prospect of facing them again filled even the most hardened warlords with hesitation. The element of surprise had been lost, and now the galaxy knew what Earth was capable of when pushed to its limits. For humanity, the victory was bittersweet. While they had defended their home, the price had been high. Countless families had been torn apart, entire cities reduced to rubble, and the planet's defenses stretched to their limits. Yet amidst the mourning and rebuilding, there was a sense of pride that permeated every corner of the Earth. The U.S. Marines, along with the other branches of the military and civilians who had risen to the challenge, had achieved the impossible. They had stood against a galactic empire that had crushed countless worlds before them, and they had forced it into retreat. In the aftermath, the Marines returned to their bases, but there was no time for rest or celebration. They knew that while the invaders had been repelled, the galaxy was vast, and new threats could emerge at any time. The lesson of the invasion had been clear: Earth was no longer an isolated, unknown planet. The galaxy now knew of its existence, and while that knowledge had been earned through victory, it also meant that Earth's future was uncertain. The Marines, always vigilant, understood that the next battle could come at any moment, and they prepared for it with the same discipline and resolve that had carried them through the war. Meanwhile, Earth's leaders faced the monumental task of rebuilding. The cities and infrastructure that had been destroyed in the invasion needed to be restored, but more than that, there was a shift in the way humanity saw itself. Earth was no longer just a single planet on the edge of the galaxy, it had become a player on the larger galactic stage. This new reality required a different kind of thinking. Alliances needed to be forged, defenses strengthened, and new technologies developed. Humanity had learned much from the advancements the Marines had made during the war, and now they were using that knowledge to prepare for the future. The Galactic Empire, humbled by its defeat, kept its distance from Earth. However, the story of what had transpired on the small blue planet spread quickly throughout the galaxy. Earth's warriors, especially the U.S. Marines, became the stuff of legend. Tales of their resilience, their tactical brilliance, and their refusal to surrender circulated among other civilizations. For many, Earth became a symbol of defiance, a reminder that even the most seemingly insignificant adversary could become a formidable force if pushed too far. Despite their legendary status, the Marines did not revel in their victory. There were no grand parades, no self-congratulation. For them, the war had not been about glory or recognition, it had been about survival. They had faced an enemy far more technologically advanced, far more experienced in galactic warfare, and they had emerged victorious not because of superior weapons, but because of their determination to protect their home. The Marines knew that their duty was far from over. The galaxy was full of unknown dangers, and while the invaders had been driven back, others would surely come. Their mission was to remain ever vigilant, to defend their planet and their people against whatever threats might come next. As time passed, the memory of the invasion became a part of Earth's history. Children grew up hearing stories of the Marines who had stood against the Galactic Empire, and for those who had lived through the war, the scars of battle served as a constant reminder of what had been at stake. But for the Marines, there was no end to their mission. They understood that the galaxy would not forget what had transpired on Earth, and neither would they. In the Empire, however, the invasion of Earth had shaken the very foundations of their rule. What was once considered a mere formality, a swift conquest of a weak and isolated planet, had turned into a disaster that called into question the Empire's invincibility. The galactic forces, who had never imagined defeat at the hands of a planet like Earth, were left scrambling to pick up the pieces of their shattered confidence. The retreat from Earth had not only been a military defeat, but it had also struck a blow to the Empire's reputation across the galaxy. No longer could they be seen as an unstoppable force, and their loss at the hands of Earth's warriors sent shockwaves through their ranks. Now, the galactic leaders were forced to reassess their entire strategy. They had underestimated Earth once, and they couldn't afford to make that mistake again. But there was no easy solution. The idea of launching a second invasion was considered, but the thought of facing the U.S. Marines once more filled them with unease. These humans had proven to be more than just a nuisance, they were a genuine threat. The Galactic Empire, for the first time in centuries, was left with a choice it had never faced before: continue to expand its reach through force, or rethink its approach in a galaxy where even a seemingly insignificant planet could fight back. For Earth, the war had left its mark, but it had also forged a new identity. No longer would humanity be seen as a backwater species, vulnerable to the whims of the galaxy's more powerful empires. Earth's warriors, particularly the Marines, had proven that humanity had the strength, the will, and the spirit to stand against any foe. The invasion had been a test of that spirit, and the result was clear: Earth would not be broken. As the Galactic Empire retreated, Earth was left to rebuild, but it was also left with a newfound sense of purpose. The world that had once focused on internal struggles was now united against a common enemy, and that unity was its greatest strength. The galaxy had been put on notice. Earth was not a planet to be taken lightly, and its defenders were among the most formidable warriors in the universe. The U.S. Marines, having secured their victory, knew that their work was far from finished. The galaxy was vast and other threats could emerge at any time. But for now, Earth stood victorious. The invasion was over, but its lessons would resonate for generations to come. Earth's warriors, once thought of as soft and insignificant, had proven themselves to be among the toughest, most capable fighters in the galaxy, and the galaxy would never forget the day they faced the unbreakable spirit of humanity.